welcome everyone to Working Wonders. I'm Siobhan, your host for this SCRIP-J vlog series, where we'll chat with leading persons of interest as they delve into their personal and professional lives, leaving with us interesting nuggets which we hope will inspire and motivate you to make positive changes in your lives as well as in the communities where you reside. Today we will be chatting with Alfred Aguiton, Chairman and Managing Director at All Media Projects Ltd. So, Mr. Aguiton, I have to ask, I know I've introduced the company as All Media Projects Ltd, but what does the E stand for?
Well, the E stands for excellent, it stands for enough, it stands for easy, it stands for all sorts of things that we are not allowed to say on the air.
Okay.
Yes. But let me start by thanking you for having me as a guest. And
of course, thank you for being here, Mr. Aguiton.
Wish you luck with the interview.
And now I've seen that you have a very extensive background in media. Can you elaborate on that for us?
Well, I was leading an innocent life until 1963, when folks at Radio Guardian at the time, which became 610 Radio, got in touch and said that they needed somebody to replace a good old school friend of mine, Raoul Pantin, now deceased, as a radio, mainly a broadcast journalist, as a news editor at 610 Radio. So I packed up my bags at BWI and I headed to Radio Guardian and didn't move from the same spot for 11 years. So that was pretty good fun,
And is it that you became manager of one of the, our first FM station in Trinidad?
Yes. For my sins, I moved through different levels of being a broadcast journalist, from news editor to producer, current affairs manager, and following some extensive enough training at both the BBC and at Syracuse University. The station felt that it should venture into an area that nobody else had gone into, FM radio. And FM 100 was launched, and they asked that I should do the programming and then manage the station from then on. So that too was good fun.
And how did that contribute to you basically starting up or giving birth to Ample?
Well, some mixed fortune occurred. And in fact, one misfortune occurred. After 11 years at 610 Radio, I was joined in the last 2 years at 610 Radio by Alfred Aguiton, who is unfortunately now deceased. And she had come from her studies at UWI. She used to do the university students program at 610, and I knew her then. And when she graduated, we took her on at 610 Radio. And she joined the copy department doing commercials, but wanted to get so much into the kind of production, documentary making that we were doing. She asked to join the team that I was running at the time. And for 2 years, we did that kind of work, a whole rack of programs. And then eventually, in 1974, Radio Trinidad, which was the only other radio station at the time in the country, said that they needed to start a current affairs department to compete with the one we had at 610. And I felt it was only fair, in the interest, this noble feeling that it would be in the interest of the country to join Radio Trinidad. Jones Madeira, a pal of mine, he had just come back from his stint at the BBC. So he could have taken over at 610. And my dream was that both stations would then be serving the interest with good current affairs work, staying on top of the news and doing information and education type things. So we answered the call at Radio Trinidad, Astra and myself, and we went there, and we ran into an interesting situation that the trade union there felt that some folks who were at Radio Trinidad should have been given the opportunity. But that was really a bit of a guise for the fact that I had been involved I'd been a trade union person myself in that same union, and I'd been involved in starting a new brand trade union for media workers. And I think this old trade union felt that we were going to go over there and do the same and get them out of their fairly lucrative arrangement with fees and dues that they were getting. So they led a strike that lasted 3 days. So I worked at Radio Trinidad for a total of 19 days employed, 3 of which would have been spent in the strike. And the station felt they couldn't keep the station running at a loss with a strike on. So they terminated both Astro and myself. And we felt that we couldn't go back. We didn't want to go backwards. We didn't want to go back to, although 610 Radio called and said they would offer us new employment. We didn't want to go back, and we figured the best way to go forward, we consulted 2 really good friends, Hazel Brown and now deceased Philip Nunes. They had a business management consultancy, and we were friends before. And they called and said, look, can we give you some advice? Why don't you go into your own business instead of looking for employment and being fired again? So how do you do that? And they told us, well, first of all, you need a good, friendly bank. So go to Philip Rushford, who is then heading up National Commercial Bank. You need a good lawyer. Go to a fellow named Al Roberts, who became the father of Annie Roberts, and take it from there. So we got incorporated with Al leading the way, and we got a bank loan of $8,000, $4,000 in Astra's name, $4,000 in mine. And that was 1974. So that's like 45 years ago. I'm not sure we ever paid off the loan. I hope we did. So that's how we decided to start our own agency. And we figured we might as well get very filled up with gumption and self-confidence and call it All Media Projects Ltd. Because we really had some experience and expertise in radio, in television, in print. So we could handle those 3 levels. There was no social media in those days. So we didn't have to worry about that. But we went from being incorporated to getting a 1-room place on Frederick Street. We were just 1 block away from the Royal Jail. So that made us rather sort of comfortable. So we were close to our second home in case of anything. And we got started with just the 2 of us, and then we took on a secretary, and we started to grow from there. And over the 45 years, we grew to as many as 63 staff and a whole number of clients as a result. We offered, interesting thing about that is at the start, we knew that we were not an advertising agency. We didn't have that background, experience, and know-how. But a couple of the agencies actually came by and gave advice, maybe looking out for their territory, but I think it was genuine because I knew some of them from before. And Clive Belgrave and Ian Collier and so on. And they came and they chatted and advised how we could go about getting into the advertising business. So we started to say that because we come from adversity, we'd go into advertising. We figured there was some divine scriptwriter in our lives at that point. But we did offer ourselves to advertising agencies to be an arm of their agencies to do public relations and media productions and media projects. Nobody wanted to do it in those days. So there we were on a desert island by ourselves. And we started to get response from clients, would-be clients, people like old man Fernandez himself, where we are in this recording, Jimmy Fernandez. He said he would assist, and we took it from there. It's been a long road, 45 years.
Well, I know you mentioned that at that point it wasn't very competitive as it is now, where the environment in advertising has become highly competitive. How would you say, Ample has continued to evolve to stay ahead of the curve?
Well, we certainly evolved from being a small public relations type project agency to becoming an advertising agency, accepted by the Advertising Agencies Association, where you have to satisfy certain criteria, number of staff, number of clients, and the kind of annual billings that would have you recognized. So we grew that way because we started to, in fact, attract more clients than we could handle, because that's the normal sort of phenomenon you get when a new kid is in town and people hearing you for the first time. seeing you for the first time and wanting to change from their own agency of records. We became an agency of record to a range of clients. And don't want to do name dropping too much, but it really went from A to virtually Z. We increased our capability. So we became adept at our own internal, in-house radio productions and video productions. In those days, slide presentations were the craze ahead of PowerPoint and those other new applications. We then took on event management on a big scale. So we had a number of projects like the opening, formal launch of the steel mill at Point Lisas. In fact, the whole estate, we were involved in the launch of the estate. And we started to work a lot in the energy sector. Contracts with BP in those days, they'd just taken over from Amoco. Pretty strong client in CLECO. And CLECO, of course, at one point, and during the time we were there, they'd become the largest corporate body in the Caribbean. And they had stakes everywhere, perhaps too many stakes, too many everywhere. And they were extremely successful in what they were doing. But they allowed, Lawrence Dupre, a very visionary kind of guy, and he allowed unprecedented projects. Like we did the CLECO calendar for a number of years, and they became collector's items because of the original artwork that we used on every page every year, collected from Haiti through the whole Caribbean, wherever there was good art. So projects like that. Again, back to event management, we did something called the topping out ceremony for the launch of the two twin towers, the Financial Tower and the Central Bank Tower. And the British contractors who built them, Wimpy, they have a traditional ceremony. When they've reached the top floor, they do a topping out ceremony. The buildings weren't yet completely finished, but they had a big ceremony, it's traditional.
What exactly is the topping out ceremony? Or is that when you usually...
Top floor, they call it the topping out. And, it's a sort of architecture, contractors kind of tradition. But it involved a lot of protocolaries, inviting from the Prime Minister through all the dignitaries you could put together in Trinidad in those days. In the case of the launch of the steel mill, I remember we brought in 7 different kitchens for 1,200 guests. And we had to bus people in because the grounds had not yet been fully paved. And rain fell, of course. It always falls in Central. There was a lot of mud to contend with. And whereas in that event we had to warn ladies about high heels in the mud, the topping out ceremony we had to warn ladies about, well, they shouldn't wear loose-fitting skirt-type outfits because of the breeze. Yeah. Tremendous breeze out there. And there is a sway factor built into those two towers deliberately. So sometimes you feel the building move and so on. So we had to do a lot of warning in our program. Folks wouldn't panic and scamper for the exits. Other events would be like, again, in this location, where not a little further down the road, the Angostura folks, where they had the butterfly collection. And they invited the Queen to, I think it was maybe 85. The Queen visited Trinidad, and one of her stops was the visit to the butterfly collection at Angostura. So we had to convert that whole area into a royal spot for lavender, you see.
So I guess I'm understanding why you don't just call yourself an advertising agency, because there's so many different components, event planning, it's a hub for all of these different forms of media and in one company. Okay.
Too many. Quite a lot. So the experiences went on and on for all those years. And in terms of competition, we, as far as I know, we held our own with all the established agencies. But we would have been up against agencies that most of them were established as branches of world, international, global type agencies like McCann Erickson and NCK, Norman Craig and Kamal, BB&B, Lonsdale Hands, Saatchi, and it became Saatchi and Saatchi. And because of that connection, they had a different kind of foundation and strength that they could draw on from the parent company. But we were really the first indigenous agency of that kind of all media type.
Trinidad, born and bred, essentially.
Absolutely. It's the only place to be born and bred. Okay. Just to complete the cycle and tracking the agency's bit, what happened eventually and what still prevails now would be the upsurge of, maybe you could call it hot shops, one-person operations. Many of them either one young lady or one young man who can do a number of things. Thank goodness for the computer facility, able to do graphics work. You don't need. At one point, we had 7 graphic artists in one big graphics department that we had, and a whole number of account execs and so on. All of that now can be collapsed into a good application. And clients, because that reduces costs, overheads are low. Somebody working from their bedroom and dining table and so on can afford to charge a lot less than an agency would have to charge. So that kind of put a hole in the Titanic a little bit. And things took a dive for a number of agencies. So there's been that fight to find your footing and to adapt to mainly the social media uprising. That's quite a phenomenon. So agencies have had to trim their sails and not be as large and widespread in their activities as before.
Well, Mr. Aguiton, can you tell us about some of your other endeavors outside of Ample?
Yes, I think a number of them come up in my mind as being punishment. And I believe it may have had to do with the fact that we were successful with particularly a political party that we assisted in them winning elections a couple of times. In 1991, when the PNM under Mr. Manning won elections, one of the first responsibilities they had would have been, because they won it in December of 91, Carnival was coming up in fairly early February. It was virtually a matter of weeks. And the very first state enterprise that had to have a board appointed was the National Carnival Commission. I had to stay too long in the story, but I think history should record that the outgoing government, the National Alliance, NAR, were very, very, very decent about how they handled the matter of the NCC, because they're the ones that got the National Carnival Commission Act approved in Parliament. It was about to be given final assent when the elections came up. And it was felt that it would not be proper for the outgoing administration to appoint a board and to solidify too much, to tie the hands of the incoming government. I think the NAR kind of expected they would lose because of the 1990 experience. And so when we got in there, we had to be appointed and give assent, give life to the act establishing. So for the first time, there was a National Carnival Commission. All the years before, there was CDC, the Carnival Development Committee, and that ran the carnival. And in fact, from 1975, the guy who headed up CDC, Prince Cumberbatch, would call me because I knew him from, I used to do the carnival broadcast. So I knew carnival for about, maybe certainly the 11 years I was at the radio station. We did commentary every year. Okay. And I had to do interviews, and so Prince knew me. And he would call and say, could you all do some little ads for us? So we started to get into the experience and the familiarity with carnival administration from then, because we were the agency every year, he would call. And I think a mix of that and the fact that Mr. Manning felt that he could take a little more advantage of me, he would ask if I would accept the appointment. That's a whole long story that belongs in an autobiography, a biography at some point. But certainly, it wasn't all that willing on my part. But I figured that I could try because I saw it as one large but complex, very complex event. And we figured we could take it on almost like an ample project. Of course, that kind of overconfidence, that gets knocked out of you very soon. Like anybody else who's been at a carnival could tell you. And most new folks go in and are very brave and think that they can change things and move things around and so on. And then the truth starts to keep you awake in the night. So I was there. In fact, the carnival was so very true to itself that it led to a mild heart attack. Because I not only had Carnival of '92, but in that same year we had CariFesta 5. Because we came in and we met that the NAR had prepared for CariFesta in August '95 on an extravagant scale. It would have been the first CariFesta for a few years because other islands, they're supposed to rotate CariFesta as host countries. But the other islands had been having a lot of economic, financial problems and they could not host. So there had been a kind of lacuna, a space for a few years, maybe 4 years or so. And it became Trinidad's turn. Now, again, with credit to the NAR and how they saw culture in a very refreshing way, led by Prime Minister Robinson, and the Minister of Culture was Jennifer Johnson. And they had, a lot of energy for CariFesta. So they undertook it on a large scale. They committed to it a certain way. And they indicated to the guest countries that were coming, like maybe minimum 25 countries, that they would pay for their air transport and they would pay for their hotel accommodation. The CariFesta budget was something like $70 million. So when the Manning government took over and saw the state of the Treasury, that would have been one of the areas to be cut. So I think it came down to maybe 9 or 10 million. But it was not difficult to make the cuts, the adjustments. You simply had to write to all the countries and say, sorry guys, you'll have to pay for your accommodation. And you have to buy your own plane tickets and so on. But because it was NCC, we got the responsibility of CariFesta. So I would have had Carnival '92 and then CariFesta in that year. And apparently there was disagreement with the heart area that I have, with all of that. It was kind of loaded. I hadn't been accustomed to, the stresses are enormous anyway. So there was a mild attack. And on the grounds of that, which I felt was convincing enough, I submitted a resignation. And the Minister of Culture at the time, Joan Yule Williams, she wrote me back saying that she received the resignation. She will keep it on file. And when I've recovered, she would like me to return to the job. I thought that was very warm and kind of. So I missed out on Carnival '93. And I was very courageously held by Andre Montai, who was deputy chairman and head of the finance committee. But after that, there was a lot of pressure and prevailing on my conscience, my national service heart, different heart I had at that point, that I should come back. So I agreed to come back on condition that I would be executive chair. I couldn't do it from the climes of Ample and be working at Ample. So I'd have to move fully into the Carnival thing and undertake that. Manning explained that he was reluctant because he had a policy that he never wanted the chair of any state enterprise to be an executive chairman, to run it in spot and in situ and so on. But he relented when I justified it, and I had to move full scale into Carnival. So we took over the facilities on Frederick Street, redid the offices, and for the first time introduced this very frightening piece of equipment called computers to Carnival. Everything else was... Just to give you an example of what we encountered. When we went in for the first time, we met with the then equivalent to a general manager at his office. I noticed some black curtains at the back of him. And the room was a little warm with the heat. And I said, Leo, you have some interesting colored drapes. He said, it was not drapes, it was a black garbage bag. So things were a little rough. It wasn't difficult to move up from there. So we were able to improve facilities, premises, accommodation, equipment, systems. And I would ask your indulgence for me to tell you one story about a system that we introduced. I had asked the special interest groups representatives, MAS, PAN, and Calypso, for a full-scale, open, honest, open mic meeting. Tell us everything that you know to be wrong about how things are, and to be lacking and inadequate, and give us your best wishes and so on, and your wish list. So we had that meeting, and one of the things that was echoed by everybody, all of the special interest groups, was the bottlenecking of bands coming up to the savannah to cross the stage. And they needed a solution to that desperately. It was getting so bad, some bands would spend 5-6 hours or so sitting down in Memorial Park waiting for their turn to get on. I think most everybody knew about that experience. And while it seemed as though people were accepting it for years, they were really very greatly disgruntled by it. So I wasn't too sure what was the solution. I've never played Mass and had never played Mass, and still I've never played Mass in my life. I've never learned to beat a pan except in fooling around. And I'm a rank amateur calypsonian. So I'm a complete rube and country boy, born in French Street in Port of Spain, but not involved. So how do I clear up this challenge? So I said, maybe I get the feeling that there's a spirit inside of the Thing Carnival. Another book to write. So I won't take you through that. But I said I'd go to the grandstand and sit in the grandstand by myself around 2 o'clock in the morning and have the savannah speak to me, tell me what, a little superstitious, but. So the idea came. What we needed to do was introduce something we later very quickly would call band control. A band control system using technology. So next day, I got in touch with my pals who would react, the radio emergency guys, walkie-talkies. I said, listen, would you guys cooperate if we could run communications for Carnival? They already did some of it for security, so yes. What do we need? Walkie-talkies, a whole lot. 144 walkie-talkies. We don't have the money for that. And there's a rule in the Act. You're not allowed, NCC is not allowed to borrow money on its own. It must be approved by the Ministry of Finance. So figured, well, okay, how do we get past that? Because the Minister of Finance was an excellent athlete who could catch up with you anytime, Wendell Motley. So I know he wasn't going to approve expenditure like that. So I got in touch with another pal who headed up General Finance Company, part of the Neil and Massey Group at the time. And I said, listen, Peter Page, I need to get some kind of unusual loan. Allow us to buy these walkie-talkies. But we're buying them through a sister company of yours, Board Communications, as part of the Neil and Massey Group. And they brought walkie-talkies. And in a jiffy, typical up and running business, he said, look, leave it to us. We will work out a deal. So we got the walkie-talkies in. And then I got to my own graphics department at Ample, and I said, I need a board about the size of your backdrop that would show the streets of Port of Spain. And it must be magnetic. And I need magnetic motifs, little samples of each band. We're dealing really with the big bands that would be out that year, so we can identify them. And they would be stuck to the board. And I set up a band control room with about 12 guys, some ladies too, attending. They were all from the React team. And they all had walkie-talkies. And there was a master walkie-talkie. And there was a guy controlling the board controller. And the idea was we got the cadet force to agree with us, to assist. And we got cadets to be placed in every band with walkie-talkies. So they walked the route of these bands, and they would radio to us where each band was at the time. We had no drones in those days. We had no FaceTime, nothing else that could communicate like that.
Just walkie-talkies.
Walkie-talkies back to the central place at the grandstand in a room, air-conditioned room, soundproof. And our guy kept tracking where every band is. And we were able to tell the bands, don't go to Park Street now.
Okay.
You know, poison is already there. So head down Frederick Street and come back up Henry. So that kind of control went on. We tried to tell it to the bands that this is what would be happening. So my calculation was, for safety's sake, knowing the guys now very well, and you have no idea how interesting they could be. I thought if we told them from too soon, there could be all the negatives and it would be shot down. So I figured, let's take a chance. Carnival Sunday, we'll hold a meeting and tell them. Mistake. Carnival Sunday, every band leader is in his camp getting the last headpiece out and everything. So nobody came. So Carnival Monday came. And the first band, thank goodness, again, a good pal, Raul Garib, who knew my parents very well because they lived in houses near to each other. And his kids would babysit my parents, like grandparents, you see. So Raul turns up with his band, and he's going the wrong way. He's coming along, I think he came along the Savannah, heading east in order to get on to the entrance first, so you would avoid the log jam thing. And this is not the plan, this is not the route. So we got this young cadet telling Raul Garib, you can't go there. We have to be cleared from band control. So Raul, of course, with enough language, he said, it's crazy. So the cadet is reporting back to us, and I said, let me talk to Raul on the walkie-talkie. So Raul, Alfred, how are you going? Nice. Children fine? Yeah, okay. He's not getting nice. He says, look, I need a big favor. I don't know how I'll pay you back, but I need a big favor. I'll give your children scholarships. I'll send them to Disney, whatever you want. But I need you to take your band downtown. Go down Stanmore Avenue. You can't come to the Savannah now. You already have a band waiting there. And there was a long pause. It's the longest 20 seconds that you could. I said, all right, okay. And he went downtown. Having avoided that crisis, the rest of the day went very well. So did Tuesday. And in fact, just to cap the story, I was invited to a private dinner at President's house, President Hassan Ali. Okay. And there were only 10 of us at the dinner. One of them was Robert Amar. And during the dinner, Robert Amar decides to tell the story of Carnival Tuesday. And I think he was being nice to me. And he said, I will never forget, we crossed the stage around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and we did not know where to go. We did not know what to do. We had never passed the stage that early. We had no plans for the band. So he said, we went, President Hassan, he said, what you did, Robert? So we took the band into Havelock Street, into that posh area with residents in those days, no business places and so on. And he said we partied on the street until midnight, Tuesday night, because they didn't know where to go. And we logged the last band crossed the stage at 5:25, Carnival Tuesday.
So your plan worked. To an extent?
To an extent.
So tell me, what does the future have in store for Ample? Maybe not even just locally, but on a regional scale.
On a regional scale, we'll keep pushing at the market to see what there is. Things are very cyclical because countries are going through their own economic crises, and they can only do what they can do. And usually in most of the regional territories, the private sectors fairly closely tied to the state side, to the government. So on the one hand, there's spending by the government of a kind, limited spending because of their budgets. On the other hand, a number of the private sector organizations are either directly funded or they're partnering with the big guys in Trinidad. So that the Antimacal group, conglomerate, they have replaced, for instance, Neil and Massey in terms of strength and footprint. They're all over the Caribbean and into North America. They are, as far as I know, also in Latin America. But those areas are subject to, it's like, if Trinidad sneezes, they get the cold, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of restlessness and instability in marketplace generally throughout the region. So your timing, you've got to be very well timed to get in there and get any opportunities they have. So we keep looking for those. There are green shoots, but we have to look for when we could do the breakthrough to water them. There's, I think, a range of possibilities out of Guyana because of the oil find. And they're going to be, all the predictions are by expert analysts and so on, would be that they will become the richest country in the Caribbean in a very short time. Certainly by 2020, they're going to see the first monies rolling in at a US dollar kind of count. And given that Guyana is not a very expensive country at this point because their population is maybe about 700,000, but they've got fantastic mineral resources. They're 83,000 square miles in size. Trinidad is 1,400 or something like that, even when you count Tobago. You certainly have got a lot of opportunity there. So we're looking at that market as a possibility. But marketing now has become, it's paradoxical. To get money, you have to spend money. So to market in other territories, you've got to be very clever, very creative with how you spend, because you're not sure you're going to get back. You're going to get a job, you're not sure that you're going to get a contract to cover that. So even when you partner with home-based agencies, and that's one option we have, it still is a cost for you to just go into a country, and you're going to have to spend some time, and you're going to spend some time in a hotel, and you must make an impression. So you've got to take people out to lunch and to dinner and all the other expenses that go with marketing. Maybe some tokens to give away and some thank you gestures and so on. Not bribery, but just things that you've got to make available and things you have to make happen. That is an output that you have to be very careful about. So a lot of judicious thinking and acting would be called for now in these times. And you don't have the backing of the big international agencies, so you're not landing there with a Saatchi and Saatchi flag or McCann Erickson flag and so on. It is going to be an interesting, uphill but interesting. So the challenge is there. That will be one area for marketing we're looking at. At the same time, we are going to take some decisions about trimming our own sails and working differently and as they say, working smartly. And that may involve some decentralizing. So for instance, I think companies and certainly agencies are discovering that you don't have to have the same physical premises as before. You don't have to have a spiffy boardroom and a meeting conference room and a room for just artists and a room for account execs and a cafeteria. So we've been there. I mean, in fact, the building we had at Gray and Dragway Road was a handsome 2-story old building. They've been there since during the war. And we had to renovate and get in shape. But you don't need that again. Clients don't even have to come to you. They're not even interested in coming to you anymore. They're more comfortable in their own surroundings, and they can work with you electronically, digitally, by emails, and we transfer files and FaceTime if you have to look at the person. And it's a whole different set of approaches that are rising almost on a daily basis. So we're trying to capitalize on those things. So we probably won't have to have overhead expenses as we've had before. And that will impact on our costs in terms of cost estimates that we give to clients. So that should be, the reduction in expenses should be reflected in our own cost to clients.
Of course, before we close things off, I have to ask, what is some practical knowledge or simply advice that you have for, upcoming graduates who aspire to follow in your footsteps?
I think the soundest advice I would be able to give is don't follow in my footsteps. Not a good idea unless you're really prepared to, well, first take some stress level tests and make sure that your heart is okay. Because the stresses have increased. There's a lot more urgency. There's a lot more meaning to the word deadline, especially the first syllable. So that I would think caution is important. While, fortune favors the brave, it also leads to a number of brave folks losing either their lives or their houses and so on. I would think that being prepared to work 25/8, we've gone past 24/7. So we're now looking at adding on hours to a day and doubling up, adding on a day to the week. Tremendous amount of sacrifice. I'm not sure because at 76, I'm not too in touch with what folks at 31 think and how they function. 31 I was when we started Apple. I'm not too sure if there's that preparedness for extreme sacrifice. You're going to lose your liming time on the avenue. You're going to lose going down the islands. You're going to lose flying off to Caribana and New York and Disney and so on. You're going to have to sacrifice for a while.
So essentially, be prepared to work for the next however many years, as long as it takes, once you're passionate or determined to make something happen for yourself, put in the work.
I couldn't put it better than that.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Mr. Aguiton.
My pleasure.
Thank you for viewing our SCRIP-J vlog series, Working Wonders. If you found this content to be interesting and of value, feel free to like, comment, and share, because we'd love to have your feedback. And don't forget to check out our next vlog and stay connected with us via social media or even our website, SCRIP-J.com. You can see the link in our post description. And remember, keep doing the wonderful work that you do. Bye.